Committee of the Whole. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of Fernie City Council held at 6:36 p.m. on April 16th, 2024. Apologize for the late start. We've had some technical difficulties at our end. Kisuk Yukit, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the city of Fernie is located within Kukinamakis, the unceded territory of Yakutat Nucleat. We recognize that we live and work within their vast lands. Akanahunik are from Yakutat Nucleat and are members of the Ktunaxa-speaking peoples of British Columbia, Idaho, and Montana. Before I call the meeting to order, I'd like to acknowledge that this week is National Volunteer Week, and I would like to acknowledge and congratulate all the volunteers that make this community such a great place to live, and remind folks that Earth Day is on Monday, April 22nd. With that, I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor McIsaac, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. We have no minutes to adopt, so I'll move on to the public participation period and invite members of the public in attendance or participating electronically who wish to comment on items listed on the meeting agenda in accordance with section 3.7.3 of the procedure bylaw to address council, except speakers must not address council regarding a matter for which a public hearing must be held or has been held pursuant to the Local Government Act prior to council's consideration of the matter or adoption of the bylaw. Speakers must not address council regarding a permit for which public notice must be given or has been given pursuant to the Local Government Act prior to council's consideration of issuance of the permit. And a speaker, may only address council for a maximum of 3 minutes. And I'll turn to Ms. Rhodes. Is there anyone online that's indicated? No. Thank you. That moves us on right smartly to item number 7, report from Assistant Manager Bjornson. Welcome.
Thank you, members of council. Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the delay. This evening, we're just going to have a quick review of this past winter. And we'll just talk about what went well, what didn't. It was a very positive winter overall. So we'll start with the policy directive, just a quick reminder of what triggers what we do and when. We'll talk about the weather. Just a few general statistics, basically comparing to last year. We have some operational challenges. We did implement a new communication package this past winter that went extremely well. We'll touch on that. And like last year, we'll follow up with the accomplishments in a positive way. So 0 to 3 centimeters, 1 sander, 1 sidewalk machine, and either a loader or a grader that are plowing snow in the facility parking lots. 3 to 5 is basically the same, just with 2 sanders out on the roads, 1 sidewalk machine, and someone in the facilities. But we'll focus on a full plow, which is 5 centimeters or greater, and that's all hands on deck, which is 12 pieces of equipment and 2 traffic control personnel people. Here's just a brief reminder of last year of the 6 areas, if you include West Fernie being the unshaded white area. With a full plow, it always is a good reminder. Our commercial alleys, they are plowed every time we go out on a full plow. So there's a map indicating all of those. They are a driver of SRs or a service request for people asking for their alleys, but there is pretty strict language that dictates who gets it plowed and who doesn't. And last but not least, our sidewalks. This winter, most people, including myself, were under the impression it was a light snow winter, but there was 18 full plows. And you compare that with only 7 the previous winter. So it was actually, especially from Christmas, a lot more steady snowfall. Grizzlies, fittingly, was the biggest snowfall of the year. And what's becoming more and more prevalent is the winter rainstorms. My first winter, we had one significant one. This past year, we had 3, and they're becoming quite an operational challenge every winter. So here's some general statistics. This past winter, and I'll touch on it a little bit, we really focused more on towing rather than ticketing. Ticketing wasn't having much of results based in a positive way. We just found that our bylaw officers were in court arguing the tickets all the time, and basically the problem there is especially there was always cars still on the roads. So we focused to towing. It did have a positive impact. We did notice our problem areas were much more compliant than last year. The request for service, this is a good indicator of how we're doing overall, I believe. Last year, there was 178 snow and ice related. This year was 141. Seniors windows was basically the same, a couple less this year. That's just due to possibly houses being sold or people just not registering. The overtime hours, that ebbs and flows with the winters. I only have last year and this year. I think a good indicator would also to be at 2021-22 when there was 635 hours. Just to give you an indication of how it ebbs and flows with the winters. Last year was quite mild. This was the information pamphlet I was talking about. Our bylaw officers started in the autumn, and we did a blitz delivering them to every residence in town in mid-December. It's just an information package about the winter snow policy, parking bylaws. We also attached a winter parking map to each pamphlet with the individual neighborhoods we were in. And I think this may have been our best decision that we did last winter. I think it worked out excellent. Our bylaw officers also said it made a huge difference. So this will be something we do carry on next winter and the years going forward. I just think it's the most efficient, quickest mass communication we can do. Operational challenges. We touch on this every year, but the uncovered winter sand that's prone to the elements, the rain and the freezing. Last winter, we had 162 hours spent. All that is trying to get the sand into our sanding trucks or unload them at the end of the night. This past year was 227 hours. That's 220 hours that the truck wasn't on the road because the operator was fighting with the frozen or either saturated sand, trying to get it loaded. Illegal parking, as I touched on before, it is getting better, I believe, but it's still an issue. We are gonna put out more winter parking bylaw or alternate parking signage in town at the request of our bylaw officers. It's heavily focused downtown and in Ridgemont, so we're gonna put some up in some outlying areas. Citizens placing snow from their driveways onto plowed roads. This is still an issue. I don't think it's any better or any worse than years gone by, but it's definitely something we still focus on. And we definitely stop and provide education and feedback when we do catch people in the act. It's received well by most, but some people they need more time. And incidents of verbal abuse directed at city staff. I was surprised this year when some of the operators, I'm not surprised, happily surprised, they said it's going down. I mean, I was not directed at me, but I was called to assist, and I can think of at least 4 specific incidents where an employee was being harassed quite severely by a resident. Some of them did require follow-up from the RCMP, but if it is going in the positive direction, I think that's an indication that the satisfaction level of the snow the plow service is going up. Accomplishments. The first one is I didn't think we'd get to where we are now, but a 75% decrease in accidents. And these are accidents where we accept fault. And this past year, we only had one. 2 years ago, we had 4, and 1 year ago, we had 4. 2 years ago, we had 7. So we're definitely trending in the right direction. And yeah, all the credit has to go to the crews out on the street. They're taking their serious safely, and they're really showing. Like I mentioned, the pamphlets for the winter parking and snow plowing is just a great idea. Have to give credit to the crew. They're the ones who came up with it. And definitely it will be going forward. And the Name the Snowplow contest turned out to be massively successful. Mayor Milligan was with us when we hosted the winning classrooms. I think it was just an excellent success. So we have a bunch more we're going to name this winter, and we'll carry on and invite the winning classes again. That leads us to the end and the questions. If anybody has any.
Thank you. Questions from council, comments? Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I did have one quick question in the report. I didn't see the skate park parking lot listed in the plow as needed. And I'm just curious if that was because last year was essentially a construction site, or if that was an omission, or?
No, we have our overnight winter parking lots that are on the map. We didn't map those because we might encourage them to become campgrounds. We do plow that one and the new paved dog park as needed, but we didn't advertise them as overnight parking spots.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Bjarnason. I do have a couple. One, I brought your attention already. We didn't have the snowplow names in the report. So in future, if we could know which grader is Darth Blader, that would be awesome.
Yeah, we are planning the annual equipment showcase with the free swim at the aquatic center. I believe it's May 23rd. We'll definitely have a couple of them parked out there.
Excellent. With the expected or observed increase in rainstorms or rainy periods, have we made significant operational changes as a result, or are we planning operational changes to accommodate for that?
It's tough to predict. I mean,
fair. When
we see it coming, we'll definitely get on opening catch basins as soon as we can. But if we're getting more than 5 centimeters today and it's planning on raining tomorrow, there's only so many people to do the work. So
yeah,
a lot of times it is a scramble. We definitely try to get on it as soon as possible.
Thank you. And that, just for folks listening, the uncovered sand is a project in the budget for this year, I believe.
Yes, and we did tarp it last winter. It was fairly successful. The only issue is comes from the quarry, and it's probably getting rained on there out there in the summertime. This year we're going to try to have it delivered early, probably in June or July, and we'll tarp it immediately. And then when we're ready to blend, we'll blend it with the salt and we'll tarp it again. It did help, but it's definitely not an ideal solution.
Mr. Burdett.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. Just for clarity, design is scheduled for this year.
Thank you.
Construction next year.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. That is an important clarifier. And then just the only other question I had is, in your report, we talk about the implications of bringing West Fernie in as a service area that we would take on fully versus contracting out. Does absorbing that change, I'm not sure how to articulate this, or change or impact the priority of other areas currently being plowed?
We will have to change some things, like first thing in the morning in town between the two bridges, we'll have one operator clearing out all the highway intersections. That's the first place to go. We will have to send another machine into West Fernie to do those intersections. But we do send the sanders out to the priority 1s and 2s first to get those safe for travel. It's not going to really delay a service, but it's just gonna reallocate a machine for probably from 4 AM till 7 on a full plow, and then they'll carry on.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Seeing none, thank you very much for that presentation. It was, yeah, good winter and well done to the crew. And I think I actually already passed this piece of feedback on to you, Brad, that I was able to, I had a neighbor approach me who just had shoulder surgery. And while we had the kids at the operations center, was able to pass on the feedback to the operator, who actually, she was trying to clear her windrow with one arm.
Yes.
And he came back and cleared it for her when he had a moment. So, and she was in tears. She was so grateful. So
Yeah, and I'm
yeah,
sure
great
that
work from the team.
I'm sure those small and unnoticed things are happening by all the crew members, but it's always nice I know he was appreciative when he heard it.
Yeah, good. Thank you again. Oh, Councilor Ramirez.
Thanks, Your Worship. I was just trying to get my numbers here, right? I was just wondering, it was unclear to me like what the cost impact is going to be for West Fernie going into 2025. Is that the $102,000 that you mentioned here, or?
The cost impact of us compared to Foothills?
No, with West Fernie's operational impact to the budget here.
Well,
Mr. Burdett, did you want to field that one?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Ramadas. There's the next report scheduled May 21st, which will be strictly on West Fernie operations plan for snow removal, is going to have more of those financial numbers for council.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
But as I understood from this report, it is a savings for us to do it versus contracting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. If there's nothing else, thank you, Mr. Biernes. I
Thank you
very
very
much
much.
appreciate it. This brings us on to item 7.2, report from our manager of planning, Mr. Semolini, on small scale multi-use housing.
Thank you, Worship. Good evening, Council. So in the fall of 2023, the province introduced changes to the Local Government Act to require local governments with a population of 5,000 or greater to change their zoning bylaws to allow for up to 6 dwelling units in some cases on single family and duplex type lots, so low density development. These changes are required to be done in zoning bylaws by June 30th of this year. So tonight's presentation, I just wanted to bring forward the concept of small scale multi-unit housing, quickly touch on the legislation itself, and then dive a little bit into a workshop with council on what our thoughts are on moving forward with getting the bylaws amended. Perfect. So just a quick look at our work plan timeline. Late January, early February, we'd sent out this timeline with notification and referrals to staff, and also the handbook or the guidebook that's part of your package tonight was sent out to staff as well. Quickly became very upfront that it is a much bigger thing to tackle than just a staff referral, and so that's, you see that the grayed out areas are things that are done, and that interdepartmental collaboration, I think, is something that happens moving forward. I'll touch on that later in the presentation when I talk about some implications. And then that brought us to February to May, so we're still working on that now, which is a draft of the zoning bylaw amendments. So again, we'll bring that forward for council to look at tonight. Do a little bit of a workshop, and take any comments collected tonight back to the drawing board, and bring something forward to a regular council meeting for the bylaw itself. April 16th, today, this presentation. Once we have the information from tonight's meeting, we'll be able to put together a communication plan to the public. That being said, it's worth noting that there is no public hearings for this legislation to be brought forward. So while we can inform the public and educate them, we cannot take in their comments in our decision making. And then that brings us through to council. We're hoping to bring this forward to council for first, second, and third reading by the end of May, with hopeful adoption early June. That gives us a little bit of a buffer, a 1 meeting buffer essentially, to get things done and reported to the province by June 30th. I think that first, second, and third reading can happen in the same meeting, and we can talk. I know it can because there's no public hearing, but we may want to consider also doing first and second reading, and I think third reading and adoption may be able to happen in the same meeting as well. But I can meet with corporate services on that, just in case there's any changes we want to do between second and third reading. Okay. When the bylaw comes back.
Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question. Noted that in the provincial information that the deadline for a potential extension to this is June 1st.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering if we're pretty confident in the schedule that we'd be in front of that, because at this point we'd be ending just after that. So if we were delayed, we would now also not have the ability to apply for an extension.
Yeah, Your Worship, through to Councillor McIsaac, I think that we are pretty confident we can get this done. It's been a focus of staff for the last several months to try to get this forward. And I also think that it's worth noting, and I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think we can ask for an extension just to ask for an extension. I think there needs to be reasoning for that. For example, if there are some major servicing constraints or something like that in an area that we're aware of, we could ask for an extension in order to fix those. And I don't know how that timeline would work for fixing something like that, but I would suppose that if we had something proposed as far as a project going, and then we could ask for an extension to get that project done and then move forward.
Yeah, because as I read the toolkit, it sounded like if there was an area that required, you could ask for an extension potentially on that area, but not necessarily for the entire community, if I read it correctly.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Your Worship. Like, there's a lot to take in, a little bit of interpretation that can be done. And I mean, if it justified an extension for the whole city, we would do an extension for the whole city. But I think it's expected that if there's no reason to not get this done by June 30th, we have to have it done by June 30th.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just curious, what happens if we don't get it done? Does somebody go to jail? Like Bruce, I mean.
I would hope that I wouldn't be the scapegoat and have to go to jail. From what I understand, I'm sure there may be some grace period given that we're working towards it. But from what I understand, if we're not done by June 30th, the province just implements their standard going forward.
Councillor Hamilton.
I had the exact same question.
Okay.
So I just wanted to quickly define what small scale multi-unit housing is in the province's guidelines. Really, it just refers to a range of housing types that will be allowed on former single family or duplex lots. So really, it doesn't really say it can or can't be certain types of housing, but some examples are there. So secondary suites, detached dwelling units, also known as accessory dwelling units, duplexes, townhomes, cottages, a whole range of things that the guideline touches on. So it's really a shift from the traditional low density zoning towards that more high density possibility. It is worth noting though that we say a certain amount of dwelling units, we can't force someone to build that. So I mean, if they still want to build a single family home, they build a single family home.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you're done with this slide yet. Yeah. I'm curious what a prescribed bus stop is. I didn't notice that in definition anywhere in the materials. I may have missed it. But the follow on to that is, oh, we don't have public transport. Does that mean, do we have prescribed bus stops in town that could potentially fall under this zoning?
Yeah, Councillor Hamilton, that's exactly this slide here. So I've sort of avoided talking about the number of dwelling units so far, just to kind of get a general idea of what small scale multi-unit housing is. But in Fernie, we don't have a public transit system to speak of other than the community bus. So we don't have the prescribed bus stops as far as I know. I know we do have bus stops throughout town, but from our interpretation, we're required to have 3 or 4 dwelling units per dwelling unit. Of course, in larger centers where there's public transit, it's generally not as required to have your own vehicle, whereas in the smaller communities without those, you have your own vehicle, or you may have your own vehicle, and that's where going to 6 units on a smaller lot and having to place off-street parking on those lots at the same time just isn't feasible. So I think the reasoning for that is the 3 or 4 units. So speaking to the
sorry, Mr. Seaman, Councillor Nixon, and then Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, just looking at this, and I'm not sure if I'm jumping ahead or not, but does this residential small scale zone mean that now the rest of the zones, like the R1 and R1SL and R1B and all that kind of stuff, disappears? I mean, are we getting our dream? Is our dream coming true of one zone to ruin the
I looked directly to Councillor McIsaac, who brought this up at a meeting. I don't know if it was a previous council or if it was this one, but we talked about doing an R1B blanket zoning. That is a possibility, yes. I mean, I'll go into a little bit more detail in that, but the province has just told us we need to allow for 3 or 4 dwelling units in this case. How we do it is up to us. So we still can have separate zones, but the crux is that the density for those zones are going to be 4 dwelling units. So we can control things like lot size or setbacks individually with different zones. But as you'll see in a couple slides, our proposal is to do that amalgamation of zones.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question actually came up from the previous slide, but please don't go back. And that was, you clarified my question for me, and that repeatedly throughout the document, it keeps mentioning a minimum units, but it's only from the permitting side, not from the building side. A person who owns a piece of property is not going to be required to build 3 dwelling units on it if they don't want to, correct? We just can't force them through zoning to build less than 3.
That's correct, Councillor McIsaac. Yeah, so there's no, we enable them to build 3 or 4, but we can't force them to build 3 or 4.
And I'll just for clarity, part of the reason for that question was I noticed and this might be useful for anybody that's actually is at home that's reading through our agenda, is it actually says in our agenda that for a maximum size of 280 square, you must allow for a maximum of 3 dwelling units. But really it should be a minimum, should it not? The language is for a minimum.
Well, Councillor McIsaac, I believe it should say maximum, so you can go from 1 to 3 or from 1 to 4. So the maximum density would be 3 dwelling units per lot, with the ability to go below that.
So, okay, just maybe I misunderstood that then. If we have a 280 square meter lot, the maximum number of dwelling units that we can allow based on the province's thing is 3. So we couldn't allow someone to build 4 there?
As far as I understand, I guess we could zone, in theory, go further than what the province is requiring us to do.
Okay, well, I appreciate the clarification, because as I was reading through it, it really, all the numbers seem to be very much focused on the province side on the minimum, as in you cannot zone for less than 3, as opposed to setting a maximum as you can't. Yeah,
there is a little bit of confusion there. So the province is saying your zoning has to say 3. We can't go lower than, we can't say the maximum density is 2. We have to say the maximum density is 3.
I see. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
On a lot of 280 square meters or less.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, council, I think I'll refer to 4 dwelling units from here on, just because we ran some numbers, and we have approximately 2,200 low density properties in Fernie, and only about 5% of those would be small enough to only require 3. So 95% are in the 4 property range. And again, I'll touch on that here in a little bit as well.
Okay, Councillor Shoesmith?
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. Councillor McIsaac already addressed one of the 2 things I wanted to bring up, which was it's not must build, it's may build. And the other thing, just to spell it out for anybody who's not been following along with this process, is this isn't entirely driven by the province, not by us. And that's why the public hearing and all that's been waived. It's not us doing this. This is us doing the will of the province here.
Councillor Adia Kelly?
Thanks, Your Worship. Manager Similini, maybe I'm getting a little ahead here. I'm wondering about some of our neighborhoods in town. What about infrastructure issues like water, sewer? How will that affect people's ability if they want to have more density? And then in some neighborhoods, I can think of like the airport, for example, the way the houses are kind of like in the middle of all the lots. Will there be different setbacks? Like how will we accommodate folks for those types of things?
Thank you, Councillor Adia Kelly. I will get to that in a little bit if you want. There's a couple slides on that. Are you okay to wait for that? Great. So appreciate the questions, and I want to sort of get into 3 areas of the bylaw that we'll be amending: definitions, zone consolidation, and those regulations that we're looking at in the zone. So I'm going to go through a couple slides here and stop, ask questions, critique, and again, this is sort of the workshop portion that I wanted to do. Definitions is not as big of a part as the bylaw. I mean, most of it is housekeeping related. So there you'll see a definition for small scale multi-unit housing that we had drafted based on what the province had. And I think that should work fairly well. One of the big questions that we have, and we're looking for some direction from council, is on manufactured homes. Our R1 zone, as it is now, says you can have a single family dwelling except for a manufactured home, whereas West Fernie, on the other hand, allows for manufactured homes. So the definition of manufactured homes here is important. But that being said, manufactured home essentially is something that you bring already built and place on the lot, and the province's definition is that you can remove that thing fairly easily. But we've seen different forms of those in the form of what you'd see on Solemn Drive, for example, or we see in West Fernie where there are a couple manufactured homes that, for what it's worth, look like houses and you would never be able to tell the difference.
Councillor Shoesmith, did you have a comment? Okay.
No, go ahead. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Milligan. There's a lot of issues with this, specifically that the definition is something that we arbitrarily place upon these things, but the industry from both sides muddies the waters. I mean, you've got built in situ houses that have pre-assembled modules installed. You've got places built somewhere else, taken apart and shipped. You've got the full spectrum, ranging from assembling it stick by stick to just bringing in a whole house. So my gut feel on this is, because the definition has to be something clear, but in practice, the industry is pretty open-ended and hazy, really hard to pin down. I think if we're going to try and pin down any specific line somewhere, we're going to create a big downstream headache for all the builders close to that line and our own planning department trying to suss out what is and isn't on one side or the other. So
yeah, I had a similar observation, except to say that I sort of looked at it from the other end. It could represent the definition change of to manufactured home, provided it meets our. And I'm sorry, would both these building codes CSA standards apply here, or is one for here and one for the Lower Mainland? I wasn't clear on that.
I believe they would both be for here, your worship, but I can confirm that.
Okay, just curious, but it struck me as a potential opportunity for certain areas in the community where people could, you know, a manufactured home of the appropriate size is plunk it in their backyard and they've got an in-law suite or a laneway house and Bob's your uncle, as it were. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. Having actually installed a manufactured home in West Fernie, and having family members who've built multi-million-dollar manufactured homes, there is a significant spectrum. And I mean, my personal thoughts on this are, as long as it meets our building code requirements, who cares where and how it's been built?
Although there are some form and character things I hope we pay attention to.
Obviously, we've got those aspects, but I think to try and limit, given the purpose of this bylaw amendment is to make housing more affordable.
Agreed.
If we're limiting what can be built because it might not quite meet a historical expectation, we're kind of doing a disservice to this direction.
I don't disagree.
I do agree. And to take that one step further, you could get a building permit and build something that doesn't look aesthetically pleasing too.
True.
So, not that manufactured homes aren't, just as an example, right? So yeah, and I think that the guidelines of the province are kind of silent on this. There's one section that says that essentially allow everything except for RVs. That's like one sentence in the guideline, but other than that, it really doesn't talk about this topic, which is why I wanted to bring it up tonight.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. We're not an HOA really, nor do we want to be one. They're evil, I think. But any of this that we seek to do through planning is sort of doubling up. We already have a, what's it called? The design committee that.
Design
Yeah.
review panel?
Yeah. I mean, why duplicate things? I mean, why not streamline things, keep them as open-ended and simple as possible on planning's end and for the builders, and leave the character and historical arguments to the body that was created to handle those things.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting one thing or another, but I fully concur that the design review panel would still play a role in terms of impact on historic neighborhoods, for example, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, your worship and Councillor Shoesmith, right now our OCP doesn't have development permit, forming character development permit areas for residential zones.
Okay. Because
we're a resort municipality, we do have that ability to do that if we wanted to, but that would actually, again, go against the intent of the legislation. And not only is the legislation meant to supply a larger supply of housing, but it's also meant to remove a lot of the red tape and permit applications that need to be done first.
That's helpful. Thank you. Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Similini, but I feel like we went around this manufactured home thing in last term with some pretty careful definitions along the lines of manufacturing as a separate entity from what we would formerly have called a mobile home, right? Where manufactured being, as you described, some portion or portions thereof of a building are built off-site and then assembled, whether that's, walls, roof trusses, the whole entire building, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I was left with the impression after that we had a fairly robust definition, differentiating between sort of the mobile home concept and the manufactured home, and that we allowed manufactured homes within most of the building zones in the community. Is that not accurate?
Yeah, Councillor McIsaac, you are correct. There was some definitions. I think what we're trying to do here is the way that, and Councillor Shoesmith touched on this a minute ago, about there's not really any clear definition or accepted definition of what they are other than what we're saying in our bylaw. So we can define something in our bylaw and go with it. But from the research I did, I believe that manufactured homes are an umbrella, and mobile homes and sorry, I can't think of the other. modular are under that, right? So we sort of tried to get them, consolidate them, if you will, but we can look at, and again, if we're looking to limit the built form or some types in these zones, we'll look at the definitions and bring it back to council with something of that to that nature.
Well, I like the thinking that as long as it meets our building code, it's appropriate. Councillor Artie Kelly, and then Councillor Nixon.
Thanks, Your Worship. You actually partially answered. Because it seems to me that just watching TV and seeing things that homes built like in factories is becoming more of a thing and is being currently touted by the current federal government as one of the ways to help with housing. So assuming that all of those are being built to codes and standards, can we, like, where's our ability to limit what that can be like? Sorry, I'm not articulating it well, but can we? I mean, if they're properly conforming dwellings, can we say no?
Yeah, Councillor Audia Kelly, I believe that's sort of where the definitions come in. Just to be clear, like a manufactured home is something that falls outside of the building code, from what I understand. It falls with CSA standards. So you bring in a manufactured home to CSA standards and you place it on a foundation. You still need building permit for that, but it's to a formality as far as the placement on foundation is important, and there are code elements to it. Whereas something that's built to code is built to code. Now that said, there's nothing that says you can't build a house somewhere else that's built to code and ship it. And what's the difference, right? Yeah. So there really, in that context, there really is no difference between something that comes to CSA standard and something that comes from a factory to BC or National Building Code and is placed.
Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So just hearing what Councillor McIsaac had said about there was a place up in the Cedars that was a manufactured home as well. I was trying to find it, and now I'm all distracted with my comments. So, but there was a place in the Cedars, and it was a presentation by Patrick Sorfleet that was very comprehensive on what a manufactured home was, and it's in our bylaws for sure. So we had to amend it, and the house looks great. It was shipped half in, and it's all good. But I like the idea of if it meets our building code. Sorry, that was disjointed.
And Councillor Shoesmith.
Thank you again, Mayor Milligan. Sorry for taking up everybody's time. It's just, this is pretty important.
That's why we're here.
Through Your Worship to staff, moving forward on this, I mean, the code is pretty universal everywhere, but what path forward minimizes the size of, how to phrase this, what path forward minimizes the amount of our staff time and management that we're placing on these going forward? I mean, if we're unifying the zonings, I mean, obviously that's going to be a big help for everybody. Personally, I'd like to steer it in whichever way minimizes our time and maximizes the residents and property owners' freedom, obviously, to work within this code.
Through to Councillor Shoesmith, I will touch on that here in a little bit too, but I think that the key is that consolidation of zoning. And then we look at the different regulations that we're looking at for setbacks, heights, parcel coverages, things like that. I mean, obviously the less restrictive those regulations are, the less need there would be for things like development variance permits. That said, I'll get into that again here in a little bit. We do have that delegation bylaw for certain things with development variance permits that would allow us to not have to come back to council, for example, and clear development variance permit in a few weeks as opposed to a few months. So there are some things in our toolbox already that we have, and then combine that with the consolidation of the zones and a lot of the types of builds that you'd see now that require council meetings and permits before building permit, it would be straight to building permit.
Thank you.
Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. If someone brings a mobile home and puts it on a lot on top of a foundation, is it a manufactured home? Does it meet our building codes?
I believe that mobile home is defined as something different than manufactured home right now in the zoning bylaw.
I think it is in the zoning bylaw.
Yeah,
But like, you know, as as you mentioned earlier, a modular home and a mobile home all fall under the umbrella of manufactured
Mhm.
home. And if manufactured home is the language that we're looking at, then that suggests to me that if we're going down the idea of anything that meets the building code, means that someone can drag their mobile home, put a foundation on a lot and drop it there. If that meets building codes, then that's good. So I'm wondering if that is actually a likely outcome here. Does that meet the design goals and different bylaws and language, et cetera?
the way that we have the bylaw drafted right now, it takes out that except manufactured home clause that we see in the R1 zone right now. So if we were to move forward with that, then mobile home or manufactured home would be permitted, or multiple manufactured homes would be permitted up to 4, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it sits right now. But that said, I think that this warrants us to take a look at that work that was previously done on manufactured home definition, mobile home definition. I don't think there was a modular home definition in the bylaw, and I think that's probably where the discrepancy is I think that the manufactured home definition in our zoning bylaw maybe means modular home as far as the standard definitions go. But I think that it's worth that review to just sort of hash that out and bring it back, because if council is happy with the way things are working right now in the zones like West Fernie and the Cedars, then why not allow it across Fernie to accompany the RSS zone too, right? So I think it's worth us bringing back to council when we bring this bylaw back.
If I just as a follow-up, Your
Further,
Worship. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I do think that if it's likely that on a lot, someone can, as you suggested, bring 4 trailers, mobile homes, and drop them there in a lot and start 4 living dwellings, I think we want to know about that. I'm not sure everybody would be comfortable with that. Skip in all places in their neighborhood. And maybe that's okay that they're not comfortable with it, but I think we want to discuss that. If that's what the bylaw is going to allow.
Yeah, Your Worship, through to Councilor McIsaac, and I think that's where those definitions are really important, because if we can define it through the zoning bylaw, then if that's prohibited, then that's fine. Do we want to have a zone where it's not prohibited and then it has to go through a rezoning type process before it's allowed? I mean, that's sort of bringing that red tape back in that the government is trying to eliminate, right? Or do we just make a decision to say, here's the standard that you can go to, and that's it, and certain built forms aren't permitted?
Councillor Hamilton.
I think Mr. Similini just kind of hit the nail on the head with the point I wanted to make to Councilor McIsaac's point. I think like the CSA Z240 or like if we set those standards as kind of our base building code, a mobile home that like you're talking about isn't built to that standard. It's a different standard that they get built to. So from a definition, like meeting building code, I think if we work through what those kind of minimum built standards are, then that allows the flexibility, but it maintains a certain minimum safety criteria, for lack of a better
Yeah, I think what
definition.
we discover though is that as we dig into this, mobile homes all the way down to RVs, like RVs wouldn't qualify, but mobile homes would meet both these standards.
Either or, yeah. And for what it's worth, you can have a modular home or a modular home or a mobile home that looks exactly the same. That one is one standard and one is the other.
Yeah.
So that like to the looker's eye, it means or stick built again. It means nothing, right?
Yeah. Councillor Shoesmith.
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. The an important distinction between the mobile and the modular. The mobile would be on a frame and can be moved later. The modular is just assembled. And the CSA standard is different from the code standard because in the province, we're going towards the step 4, like with the BC step code. The CSA code is a lot more lenient on that. There's no safety issues with the code that those have, but it's not as stringent in terms of like the installation and stuff like that. So economically speaking, a lot of people are finding that that's a way to get a much cheaper build because it's a way that you're not required to do all the extra stuff. So right, you'll be getting something like a step 2 or 3 as opposed to a step 4, which is quite a big difference in terms of how much material you're using and what you're paying for.
Carry on, Mr. Similini.
So I think that like I don't need a resolution or anything, and just for me moving forward with this, when we come back to council, just a review of our current definitions and then a further discussion at a later meeting as far as the status quo, if we're happy with maintaining that. Is that?
Well, that would be helpful. Yeah, just where we are and where we sit against this change in legislation. Because it does raise, I apologize, it does raise the question, even the delegation bylaw, is that going to require revision based on that table of setbacks, et cetera? Or are you well covered with that already?
I'll get into that.
Okay.
If you don't, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's good. So the zone consolidation, which Councillor Nixon touched on earlier, and Councillor McIsaac was ahead of the curve well over a year ago, I believe. There's potential here to roll in our R1SL, R1, R1B, both West Fernie zones, duplex residential zones into one zone, which would be the RSS zone we're referring to as residential small scale. Outside of that is the comprehensive development zones. So the zoning up in the Cedars as well as the zoning in Montaigne. Cedars zone actually refers right now to R1B. So it essentially says these areas follow the R1B zone. So we would just change the text to say these areas follow the RSS zone. And then Montaigne, we're working with the developer up there. They've actually have an application in for an overall plan that we'll bring forward. I don't think that plan will come forward before this legislation is required. So what we'll do is we'll take their definition, run it against what the province is requiring to ensure that it complies, and then amend our zoning bylaw with the same zoning lines that are currently in Montaigne for the single family zone, and then apply that zoning to it. So that's our plan with those two. So they'll still be separate, but again, that's just kind of maintaining the comprehensive development zones rather than completely abolishing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. And I apologize because this feels a lot like already getting my wish list. So now I'm about to ask for more. I wanted to ask the question, what do we need to have small scale there? Like, could we get away with residential zoning and regardless of the number of dwellings that are on the lot?
You can call it whatever you want. Yeah. It's the small scale is just to allude to the residential or small scale multi-unit housing legislation. But
like, for example, if we have a large lot with 100 units going on it, like an apartment building, is that going to fall under this, even though why not?
No, that would be the built form. So the built form of, if you have a single family lot that is zoned the same as an R4 lot, for example, do we want a 20-meter high apartment building to be built on a half lot in the annex, as opposed to the R4 zoning still allows for apartment buildings and condominiums and things like the larger scale buildings to be built, whereas this RSS zone allows for those smaller scale multifamily developments. So it's similar to the R3 zone, I guess.
Mhm.
But again, we're just kind of keeping them separate, following the province's guidelines.
So just following along, primarily what we'd be looking at then is, for all intents and purposes, we have two different residential, at the end of this, we would have two sort of different residential groupings. The smaller one on a half lot, a regular size lot with a height limitation that's appropriate for the neighborhood, et cetera, and then another one, which is large form and scale, perhaps 4 or 5 stories, 100 apartments or condos and things like that. And that sort of different massing and form. That's sort of where the separation line would be.
That's correct. And sandwiched in between there is the R3 zone. I haven't had a really close look at it yet, but it may be possible to roll the R3 zone into this as well. Again, heights and things like that we don't want to take away from the built form that the R3 zone offers, but if it's the same as what this is going to be, then we could potentially roll that in as well. There's not a lot of R3 zone property in Fernie to begin with, but it still could be something that's rolled in. So essentially you'd have 2 zones. You could still call this low density because it's lower density than, well, sort of the lower density than the R4, but it's actually not lower density than the R4 because if you put 4 dwelling units on a half lot,
Yeah.
it's way more dwelling units than what you'd get on a large apartment building lot. But again, it's that the focus is on the built form and what you can do.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Nixon?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I really like the bracketing. I like the, that's really nice. However, so you're the professional. What's the downside of doing this? I mean, are we losing flexibility? Like, what's the only downside?
Yeah, I think that we'd be the positives, obviously we've discussed those, and we're talking about taking away red tape, taking away applications. The downside would be if we were to keep individual zones, council would probably see us a lot more as far as bringing applications forward and that would slow development down. So the more, I think what the province is touching on is the more we make someone do prior to getting shovel in the ground, the longer it's going to take to build that housing, the less likely it's going to be that it's going to be built. So the downside of keeping them separate is that I don't see a downside in consolidating them per se. Again, we're potentially losing a little bit of neighborhood character, I guess, but I think you're losing that either way. It's a sacrifice, right? Yeah.
Changing, yeah.
So this map is just a quick look at our zones throughout Fernie. So anything you see on the map really in light yellow is zoned R1. So there's the airport, there's West Fernie, Maintown, the Annex, Ridgemont, and then anything you see in the lighter brown as well as R1B. So most of Alpine Trails. So a lot, it really is that blanket rezoning. Now, I don't expect everyone to know every number on this chart, but it's just a quick look at a comparison between what the province is suggesting we do as far as the regulations and what we're proposing right now. Now, it's worth noting that we just last week, I believe, received a letter from the province that said, you should really look at considering these standards and move forward with them. They're not saying we have to move forward with them. They're just suggesting. What we tried to do here is strike up a little bit of a balance between what we're seeing for neighborhood character right now, what we've seen in the past. So the current zoning, and then still try to achieve the goals that small scale multi-unit housing legislation is putting forward. So for example, now the guidelines don't really talk, I think the guidelines assume everything's going to be 4 to 6 dwelling units. Let's just say 4 dwelling units in our case again. So they say 50% parcel coverage, but the guidelines don't really talk about, well, what if there's 1 dwelling unit or 2 dwelling units or 3 dwelling units? They're just saying, well, if there's 4, it's 50%. Mm-hmm. So we went with that. It's great. If there's 4 dwelling units, it's 50%, but we reduced the amount of parcel coverage for each dwelling unit that you take away. So if you've got a house, for example, we don't want to see mega houses covering 50% of the lot. That's kind of going against the neighborhood character, and B, that's really sterilizing the entire parcel coverage for any future development that we might see towards small scale multi-unit housing. So that 35% that you see for one dwelling unit, for example, is consistent with what our zoning bylaws currently are for the R1 zone, for example, which allows a dwelling unit to be at 25% plus 10% for accessory buildings. Further to that, you look at things like height. The province is saying 11-meter height. They said 11 meters for a reason. 11 meters in what the province said allows for up to 3 stories. 11 meters measured to the midpoint of the roof or to the top of the roof. It's a flat roof. We're saying, let's stay with 10. 10 is what we have in our R1 zone right now for a principal dwelling unit. That's to the peak of the roof. So that wouldn't allow for that 3rd story. It would only allow for 2 stories. But again, it's consistent with what we currently see in newer neighborhoods. In the older neighborhoods, you see a lot of newer homes go that high, but there's a lot of smaller homes mixed in there as well.
Yeah. Councillor Hamilton?
Thank you. Just remind me that 10 meters, that is from kind of the average grade around the house. And my question is that, how do I phrase the question? I guess like thinking of the annex where there's a number of homes that fall in the floodplain. And so any development has to be X number above the high water mark, so to speak. Does that potentially constrict or restrict any development by dropping that maximum height if the grade around the house is low, but the main floor has to be 7-8 feet above the ground outside?
Yeah, through to Councillor Hamilton, it does in theory restrict that. That being said, there are certain exemptions that you can do below flood construction level, garage, foyer, things like that would allow you to design your home so you don't have to build it on stilts, so to speak. But again, the ability to have a basement, for example, with living area would be gone. So yeah, it does change things. For example, if you generally get 2 stories in a 10-meter building, now you might be down to 1.5, just depending on how you build. That said, and to Mayor Milligan's earlier question about variances and how we might deal with it, our delegation bylaw right now allows for a 10% buffer in height. So if someone were to want to build something and they came forward with justification, I'm in the floodplain, I want to get 2 full stories, we can, as staff, without having to come to council, vary up to 10% of that height. So 10% of 10 meters is 1 meter. You could go up to that 11 that the province is suggesting.
Thank you.
So again, there's a whole lot to unpack here. I don't know if there's more questions. I think that what I'm looking for is more just a comment or what council thinks of us sort of customizing these numbers, or should we be leaning more towards what the province is saying we should do? So again, province is a little bit more generic. We're potentially changing the neighborhood character a little bit more with what the province is putting forward. Whereas with our proposal, it does work to try to retain that existing character a little bit more.
I don't know about others, but I'm comfortable with that, provided we're within the acceptable range of deviation from the province's direction here.
Yeah, and again, it is sort of written in a manner that if a developer wanted to go more towards the province, they could potentially do that minor development variance permit. And if there's something a little more extreme, they could come to council. I mean, I don't think we're going to cut variances completely out. So there's the possibility, and that, again, that's in our toolkit to be able to do. But I think that this finds a fairly decent balance.
I think so, yeah.
So there's some slides here that show exactly what we're talking about. So what you'll see here is there's a province recommended and city of Fernie proposed. I really like the bottom drawings. Big shout out to Erica Hornquist who put these together for us. That show sort of the massing changes between what the province is suggesting and what we're proposing. So the gray area there is the province's massing versus the colored ones, which are ours. And the different shades kind of show the maybe dwelling units, how they'd be situated, but that would be again completely up to the developer to decide based on the definitions.
Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. So just for clarification, the third building from the right on the bottom would be like a standard 1.5 story building in the annex right now? That's the
Yes,
comparison?
Councillor, because that's there for reference. So that would be
Right.
like your standard old house
Yeah.
in main town of the
I was
annex.
just making, I
Yep.
understood it to be the reference
Yep.
and I'm just making sure that I had it right. Thank you.
Correct. So again, from the backyard view, or sorry, again, from the front yard view, a little bit of a bird's eye view look. Pretty big changes, but I'll just cycle through these if anyone has any questions. Now this one here actually shows a fairly important change in height. And I'm sorry, I should have mentioned it earlier. Right now, our R1B bylaw allows for the secondary garage suite, if you will, in your backyard, but the height for that is lower than the height for what your principal dwelling unit can be. So what we did again to try to maintain that character is if your building or buildings go within 6 meters of the rear yard setback, that the height has to be reduced. And I believe that height, I can look up that height right now or just go back.
While you're looking for that, Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship, but I might be making them look for more. I might be misremembering, but is there not also a restriction on the corner units for viewscape as well?
Yeah, it's based on sightline triangle vehicular safety.
Right.
So in cases where we have really wide boulevards, it's sort of irrelevant, but we did look at that and it's very, very minimally into that proposed front yard setback. Yeah, it's not, it was just the very edge of potential building. So we can look at reducing those sightline triangles. Like right now it's 5 meters in a 5 meter triangle. We could go down to 4 or 3 or something like that. And I think we just need to look at that sort of case by case based on what the potential hazard is or safety hazard is at each intersection. But again, in our R1, R2, R3 zones right now, there's fairly wide boulevards, right? You're nosing way out past where that house already is before you make the commitment to cross the street.
Right, and your response actually makes me wonder, and not pretending to be an architect for a moment here, but just wondering if some of the front massing could be resolved through setback as opposed to like increasing the setback on Boulevard as opposed to the height massing that's there as well. So like, I'm not sure how much flexibility we have from the province with that coverage number to do that.
Yeah, like the province has been completely flexible as far as like they haven't actually said we need to do anything. It's just that the more you restrict it, the less likely you are going to be able to get those units on the lot, right?
Right, fair enough.
And so the province has basically said, here's the optimal numbers. Like what they've given us is this is optimal to be able to develop as many dwelling units as possible on these lots, right?
Thank you.
Councillor Adi Kelly, did you have?
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. I wanted to say that I actually do like the customization. I think it's important to be flexible, and you've clarified for us that the delegation bylaw does allow you to do some of that. And if it was a bigger ask for a variance, it could still come to council. But I think customizing it and retaining the character of neighborhoods for people might actually encourage rather than discourage, because you know what I like.
No, I think you're right there.
Yeah, and further to that, there's actually some language in there to encourage. For example, we have, if you want to build a single family dwelling and that's all you want to do, your front yard setback has to be 6 meters.
Right.
But if you want to develop small scale multi-unit housing, 2 or more units, your front yard setback can be 3 meters. So that A, gives you more space, and B, incentivizes that development a little bit more. That said, to deal with parking, we can't have 3 meters front yard setbacks for parking or driveways, because then the vehicles are hanging out into the boulevard and potentially crossing sidewalks and things like that. So we did include a clause that said if you're a driveway, you have to be 5.8 meters, which is the length of a parking stall away from the property line.
And I look at this example you've got up on the screen now, Mr. Similini, and when you were talking about the reduction in height of the is it an ADU, the accessory dwelling?
Accessory dwelling unit or whatever might be back there, yeah.
Yeah, but I look at this and it's essentially, we'll call it 4 walk-ups on a single lot. I don't know why, so if this was a new build, why that would differentiate the final piece of the puzzle or the final dwelling in that circumstance. That seems odd to me. Just an observation, like it. We win if we do the first option there in terms of, and I appreciate there's a height difference between, just for illustration, but in terms of reducing the height on the back one, I don't see why we would do that, continue to do that.
Yeah, it's, again, I think it's based on our experience with the R1B zonings, and we commonly did that variance because the R1B zone, R1B was originally written for alpine trails where the properties are long and skinny.
Yeah.
And so that 6 meter setback to have an R1B dwelling unit was fairly easy.
Sure.
But then when people started to rezone into main town and the annex, where the properties aren't as long and lots of times the house sits in the middle of the lot, we were varying that rear yard setback all the time. With every R1B zone, and for those that have been on council for a while, you saw lots of them. Every R1B rezoning, we essentially did a variance with it. And the number one amount of feedback that we got in those rezonings and those public hearings that we used to do was that you're taking away the sunlight out of my backyard and viewscapes and things like that. So by reducing the height, we were just sort of trying to maintain that reduced height in the backyard that you'd see with an R1B variance, for example. But again, if we wanted to go to 10 meters height in the rear yard, it would be one less row in the zoning column, right? And so just to confirm, I think it's 8. I think we have 8 meters or 8.5 meters for that rear yard. 8 meters, so it would be a reduction of 2 meters. Yeah. So again, that's something we can bring forward. Again, it can go either way in the bylaw when we bring it forward for readings. But if council prefers one or the other, let me know and we can move forward with it either way.
Well, as I say, it strikes me as on a new build, somebody's building 4 walk-ups like this. We're penalizing them because of an artifact from a previous bylaw that was giving people anxiety.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in a situation like this, aesthetically, it would look silly to have, a 4-unit row house or townhouse, and the 4th one is
shorter,
is the little sibling, right? Yeah. That being said, you bring that up, and maybe that's an angle of, hey, we're reducing or we're increasing affordability.
Yeah, fair. But if it had a max height of 10, it wouldn't prevent somebody from building it to 8.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So again, there's the recommended versus what we're looking at. Rear yards, again, this actually shows it really well, that rear yard height difference that we were talking about on the bottom there. The 2 middle lots, the skinny lot and then the wider lot, show that reduction in massing that we're proposing. Now that the bigger house right in the middle shows more of a 1-story than a 1.5 or 2-story build, but it gets the point across that the massing in the rear yard would be quite a bit different. It doesn't show a detached dwelling unit, but again, that reduction in height would still apply. So I'll just go through those. Now this one's actually my favorite. I can't remember what street Erica said this was, but this is a street in Fernie that she took, and it just shows what sort of built out RSS neighborhood might look like. So you can see a big range of different types of dwelling units, either detached, attached. I like the one in the top left there, the has the one house in the front and then the three detached or accessory dwelling units in the back. So it just gives a really good idea of what we might see in a built out neighborhood. Now I'm not anticipating that we ever will see a completely built out neighborhood because of the range in densities that someone can do, but it does sort of give that idea. The bottom lot there is just to show what the proposed setbacks would be.
Oh,
No
Councillor
worries.
Shoesmith, sorry.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. That looks pretty fantastic, but as we go through this, I think we're going to have to be visualizing parking and being really aware of that. We don't have much choice in all of this, but that is going to be a big stumbling block.
Yeah, through to Councillor Shoesmith, it will be, and I think like as you can see there, the parking spaces are shown on the lot. With that said, though, parking takes up space, and we are in a community where, as Mr. Bjornson brought up earlier, I mean, snow removal is a thing, right? So we need to try to get off the streets whenever possible. I don't see it being as big of an issue in the undeveloped neighborhoods or the newer ones where you can just incorporate parking into your plan going forward. But if you're redeveloping a lot with an existing house on it, for example, that does become a potential challenge. And that's actually a really great segue because I can jump right into our potential implications here.
Before you do that, sorry, Councillor McIsaac had a question or a comment?
Actually, thank you, Worship. Actually, I'm probably about to redirect us into an entire parking discussion. So would you like me to wait?
Sure, why don't we wait?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the province suggests that we do a couple different analyses of what we might see. One is a maximum build out analysis, and based on the number of lots that we have, maximum build out analysis is approximately 86 or 8,700 dwelling units. If every single lot in Fernie were developed to 3 or 4 units, depending on its size. Again, that's not something we would ever see, but the province suggested we do it, and it's worth looking at. Or more likely, the incremental or anticipated build out, which is where we look at building trends, things like R1B zonings and secondary dwelling units that already exist, and what we've seen for building permits and rezoning applications in the past. We haven't done that analysis yet. That's a lot of work, but we're looking at doing that because the important part is that analysis will actually help to inform us on our future planning. And by planning, I don't just mean my department. I mean when we're talking about infrastructure and snow removal, lane access, everything. It's going to be, there's a monumental shift really as far as the way we look at things, and we need to start considering them when we're doing that planning. For example, the snow removal policy, which is great and working right now, but all of a sudden, if lane access becomes a big talking point or a vital point, we need to look at potentially shifting gears towards that. I'm not saying we would do that, but it all needs to be considered. It's all really important. So again, this is just an example of the impact that this might have. I don't want to get into too much detail because I don't have any numbers or anything related to any of these right now. But again, that incremental build out analysis and then looking at the trends once we adopt this zoning and seeing what we're actually getting will go towards us being able to plan properly moving forward.
Councillor Ramirez.
Thank you, Worship. Just do you have a ballpark of what this would look like? 80 is the maximum, but is that like 5%, 10%? Like what? Is there a educated guess that you can take?
As far as the percentage of increase in the number of dwelling units, well, we have again in our traditionally zoned properties, so that 2,500 dwelling units or 2,200 dwelling units, sorry, does not include the CD zones, the comprehensive development zones. It just looked at the current properties in Fernie. If you look at those and say there's at least one dwelling unit on each one. There are some vacant lots, of course, but for the most part, let's just say 1.25 dwelling units per lot, maybe. So you'd be increasing it by 70%, 75%. At least, it's a pretty significant number. I'm not the greatest at maths when put on the spot, but I think that's probably around what it would be. Yeah, a pretty big increase. Yeah.
Councillor Shoesmith?
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. As we implement this and as this rolls out and people begin to take us up on that, how long do we run before we start overtaxing our water and sewer infrastructure?
Yeah, through to Councillor Shoesmith, that's something we don't know yet, which is why that incremental and anticipated build-out analysis is so important. I can't say for certain, but once we implement this, again, it has to be implemented by June 30th. So we really have no choice. But once we begin to implement this, I don't see a flood of building permits coming through the door to build 4 dwelling units everywhere. So I think we'll have some time to actually figure out the trends and what we might see moving forward. And then again, we include those trends in our future infrastructure planning and things like that. I can't give you a solid number, and it might be worth flagging some neighborhoods where it may be an issue. But again, it's worth like, okay, well, what's the actual uptake in this neighborhood going to be? And if we add 100 dwelling units, maybe it's an issue, but are we going to add 100 dwelling units? Like, what's our projection on that? So we have to look at those numbers and we have to do that analysis.
Councillor Adia Kelly?
Yeah, that's actually where I was going with my question that I asked you earlier that we were tabling for future slides. Like, what if the infrastructure can't accommodate? Can we say no? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, Councillor Adia Kelly, I think that's where that extension conversation comes in. That we had right at the beginning. And again, if that extension has to be asked for by June 1st, we just don't have the capacity to know those numbers. I don't know if we can say no. So we really do need to make sure we're planning for this properly moving forward. So things like our liquid waste management plan, for example, needs to consider this now. I don't know where that's at or where we're at with it right now, but again, it's a really big implication on that. So I'm hoping that, again, we're not going to see, I'm hoping there's not a block somewhere where if you add 2 dwelling units to it, it's going to cause everyone's water pressure to drop to nothing. But I think that with an incremental build out, we should be able to handle the projections and know what those projections are before we have to worry about running out of capacity.
Someone once told me, actually it was Councillor McIsaac, try not to articulate the worst case scenario. But anecdotally, there's so many communities in the province that are struggling with their underlying infrastructure. The province will be aware of that and anticipate there will be some need to adjust as we go forward in terms of impacts to infrastructure. Councillor Shoesmith.
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. Yeah, I mean, at some point, we're obviously going to hit some limitations on something somewhere. We'll find out when we get there, I suppose. But we're definitely going to have a big discussion about DCCs and all this, because I think we will be replacing a lot of infrastructure as this goes along. And we're going to have to figure out who and how should be paying for that.
Yeah, and further to that point, I mean, DCCs are on the list, and we consider what development cost charges might be when we rewrite our DCC bylaw for these units. And again, DCCs aren't neighborhood specific, but there's a chance to use DCCs to incentivize those builds. And there's also a chance to use those DCCs to contribute towards our infrastructure and future infrastructure that's put in to handle those dwelling units as well.
Councillor McIsaac.
I don't think we should panic.
No.
No. I would just thinking out loud right now, I'm sure Mr. Similini could put more exact numbers on, especially with a bit of time, but we're probably adding 20 or 30 dwelling units to the community per year right now. with a full build out of 80,000 something, that's 6,000 units to add. So that's, we've got a couple hundred years before we get to that point. So hopefully we'll have replaced most of the infrastructure by then. Having said all that, there's weak spots. We are in desperate need of a laneway analysis done to find out where we can actually plow and where we can't. That's been raised repeatedly over the last several years and needs to get on the project list at some point. So a lot of these things, they may not have to worry about water, but it's going to be a big problem if they can't access from the back because we can't plow the laneway because the water lines are going to freeze. That's the bigger risk right now, as
really
opposed
is,
to fixing the water line.
Yeah, I agree. And again, as far as lane access goes, emergency response and access is really important too. And one thing we're looking at potentially drafting into the regulations, especially if lanes aren't immediately accessible, which they won't be, is the ability for all access to come from the street side of the property. And it has to be free and clear access. So things like fences, I'm not saying you can't have a fenced yard, but the access to dwelling units in the back cannot be crossed by a fence, for example, right? So again, we're considering those regulations, but I think they're really important because if there is an emergency and our fire department shows up and they can't get to a fire or a health emergency, that's a huge thing that we need to consider.
Yeah, and anyone who's visited a residential neighborhood in Vancouver, all those 2 and 3 laneway houses on the lots, they don't have to worry about snow in their back alleys, right? There's tons of them proliferating everywhere. Mr. Bornowski, did I see your hand up?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to respond to a slightly earlier question about where there are servicing constraints or access constraints. A number of municipalities have been discussing taking an approach very similar to large scale or medium scale new developments, where if there's not servicing, the servicing will be required, and that's managed at the development permit or building permit stage. And so it may just be cost prohibitive for someone who wants to add a secondary dwelling or 3-unit walk up on a full city lot to add to, because they're going to be installing $3 million worth of municipal servicing until such a point as we have the monies to do that upgrade ourselves. So there are active discussions happening, but typically, as with most development, that development needs to pay for the servicing to enable it. And in our case, that is a tool that we will have to manage very carefully.
Councillor Nixon?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm, it's funny because I really love the whole idea of this. I mean, it's when it was introduced by Minister Callan, I was just like, I thought it was fantastic. I just think that there's so many barriers right now, and I wish that parking was just one of them. But there's interest rates, labor shortages, building costs, everything. All these things are just prohibitively high, and it also it shifts the whole responsibility of delivering housing. And it puts it on the individual homeowners. And we don't deliver houses at scale, right? I mean, I've been delaying building a suite in my backyard for 10 years. But so I don't think we're ever going to see a big flurry of this. Is not going to be a big build out. We're not going to see tons and tons of people doing this. So there's no reason to panic. Now, the one thing that I have to think about is, let's say I look at these lots and I think about my house I have in the main town. Can I sell off part of my lot? Could I parcel out something in the front, something in the back, and then let somebody else do that for me?
Yeah, Councillor Nixon, that's a great question. It depends on the layout of your lot. Like, so you could see something like a small lot subdivision where you have 2 parcel pieces of property that you could sell off. Or it does open up the ability to do a strata as well. Yeah. Right. Where you can have a bare land strata, for example, where the service is coming into your lot. The key with subdividing lots is we can't allow, for example, front yard, rear yard, fee simple subdivisions, because the rear yard doesn't actually have street access, right? But with a strata, you can potentially do a strata subdivision where the access from the street is common to all property owners, if there's 3 or 4 of them. So in theory, the entire property has street access, and then the parcel at the back, or the house at the back, would be individually owned.
Further?
Thank you. And I'm not speaking, just because of myself. I'm just speaking in a general term and not my specific law, just everybody in general. That's all. So.
Well, it's a fair question, because that notion of subdividing and creating these strata circumstances raises all the specter of other things like STR regulation and proliferation. There's all sorts of questions that are raised. So I think it's appropriate not to panic. I think that's really the key here.
And I think one really important thing that we haven't mentioned yet is that we're assuming take up on 4 dwelling units, but right now we currently see rezonings and applications for just 2.
Mhm.
And this is actually lifting the restrictions off those, right? So where we might see that the wins is we may see more garage or suite development as opposed to the 4 dwelling units. We just might see more 2 dwelling unit properties, which is great. I mean, those things we wouldn't have seen before, right? So again, not having to come to council for rezoning or variance or things like that. That's where we might see the most amount of uptake off the bat. And then that might gain some momentum towards the 3 and 4 dwelling units in the future.
It did occur to me, actually, the question was raised earlier about the flood construction level in the annex, for example. Would that potentially exempt some of those lots in the annex? Because there is an exemption, the possibility for exemption in the guide in the hazardous area.
Yeah, your worship. So again, that's something that we need to look at. So I add to the list floodplain management on the list. Like there's a guide from the province as far as floodplain management goes that we based our bylaw on, and there's certain suggested exemptions in that council would either have to give an exemption or we include it in our bylaw. So it might be worth looking at, if we have areas in a floodplain that are also behind a standard dike, there's certain things we can exempt that may or may not be already exempted in our bylaw. So again, we can do a review of that depending on what the uptake might be. And that would allow things like mechanical equipment, for example, below flood construction level. Right now it's not allowed. Well, maybe there is a room for that exemption in the future.
Thank you. Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. Since we're on implications discussion, I wonder if this would be a good time to raise the specter of reconsidering how we do parking. I've thought about this for a little while, and I won't be surprised if there's very strong pushback right away, but I think we do parking wrong. And by that, I mean, we regulate it wrong. And what I mean by that is we currently regulate parking by requiring parking for houses. But in truth, we don't actually care how many cars are parked at a house. We are regulating the wrong thing. What we care about is how many cars are on the street. So if we were regulating the parking on the street, we would not have to regulate the parking at the dwelling units. So we could potentially have dwelling units that don't have parking and that don't require parking, and the people that live there don't have cars and they walk. Now that's a relatively small niche market for sure. We still live in a car-driven society, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on whether or not you make your living from that. But just thinking about the problem of parking when we're talking about doing dwellings and so on, I don't think the onus should be on us requiring X number of parking spots for a dwelling. I don't see what the value is in that. No one has any idea how many cars a particular household needs. Could be 1, could be 0, could be 8. What we care about is that there are not 8 cars parked on the street, right? At the end of the day, from our being able to clean the streets and plow the streets and do all those things, it's the parking management on the street that we actually care about. If we manage the parking on the streets, we don't have to manage the parking at the houses. We don't have to require parking lots. for individual dwelling units or apartment units and so on. We are in the habit of doing that way, and that's how everybody else has done it. But as we have seen, there are serious shortcomings with that. You know, we end up 1.5 parking spots at a, what does that even mean? So we end up with parking requirements where we have to make a bigger boulevard, so that it's 5.8 meters, so that you're not hanging over the side, all that stuff. The simple fact of the matter is if you're going to build a house there and you're going to have a car, you need to deal with it because you can't park it on the road. The responsibility is on the person who's building the house and owning it and deciding whether or not they want to have a car. So I think we should give really, you know, maybe this is not the, I'm piling on another layer on the cake here and maybe not really necessary. But as we're thinking about the parking thing, I think we should give serious consideration to considering parking being a street problem and not a house problem. And looking at how we're managing parking on the road and not how we're managing parking in people's yards or on the side or in front of a garage or whatnot. So I don't know how we get there. I noticed that the province is pushing us very strongly to not put a bunch of parking spots at each place. In fact, they're requiring 1, right? And and even saying we can't prohibit somebody from building if there aren't enough parking spots for a particular thing. So they have certainly seen that over-regulation of parking at dwellings is a hindrance. And I would say, fine, let's not do that. Let's not impose. Let's simply say you just can't park on the road. Figure it out. If lots of people around town do parking spots on their lawn through the winter, so they're not on the road. There are a wide variety of solutions to the parking problem all through the community. People are already doing it. So I think we should direct our regulations in that same fashion, rather than imposing on the homeowner. Let's impose the rule on the road.
Yeah, I can't disagree. And I think, you know, Mr. Bjarnason's presentation earlier highlighted that, right? Like there's a street parking issue, not a house parking issue, as it were. So I think that's a fair analysis.
Yeah, and if I may, Your Worship, I think that it's, as Councillor McIsaac noted, it's a big undertaking to potentially look at this. I think that if we are to look at something like that, overhauling our parking regulations or eliminating our parking regulations to just say no on-street parking, that could be something we look at a little bit closer when we are bringing forward an overall amendment to our zoning bylaw, which is coming down the pipe at some point. I mean, this is a really big step towards that, this RSS zoning, right? But again, like our parking regulations are from 1997, I think, in our bylaw. Like they're archaic for what it's worth. They're old, and we struggle with them every day. So that's a good point. Like maybe that's the angle or the approach we take when we are rewriting our zoning bylaws to look at regulating it in that manner rather than parking spots per property.
Yeah. Would that fall within the scope of the redevelopment of the OCP?
It certainly would, Your Worship. Yeah, like just the direction and how we approach it.
The philosophy, essentially. Yeah. Sorry, further?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I was just going to say that exactly that you know, this is a fairly big shift in philosophy for the community, and I would certainly want a lot of community feedback on this. But I also would like to make sure that if we're going to go out to the community, that there's a breadth of philosophical options there. No on-street parking is the one extreme end, right? Regulated parking on the street is in the middle, and ad hoc is at the other end. And I suspect we probably could find a middle ground that gives people some flexibility to park because it is regulated. They're allowed to park there. They live in that area, et cetera, while still not being onerous on the parking regulations. I think 1996 is pretty generous. This thing's been carried forward from the Romans when they had to park chariots, and then they just kept reissuing the same numbers over and over again. It's been around forever. So I think we could do better.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'll again, when we look at our zoning bylaws, it's maybe worth doing a little bit of research to see if anyone else has taken that approach and bring something forward.
Yeah, as Councillor McIsaac indicates, there is a spectrum. You know, there's severely restricted parking on streets. There's, you know, permit permitted residential parking on streets, you name it.
Well,
runs the gamut.
I mean, do you keep the regulations the same as they are right now, and just you park on the proper side of the street when the plow comes by, and if you don't have a parking on your property, that's what you have to do, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Worship. So I'm just curious about how many hours have you spent on this so far? I know that we got some money to help us with this transition, but are we keeping track of all of our hours and stuff like that? Just curious.
yeah, that's a great question, Councillor Nixon. I haven't kept track of my hours to a pinpoint. I estimate all of my time. Been quite busy with it. But again, it's I think that given the timeline that we're held with for this zoning, the money that we got from the province, I mean, this has been my staff time, and I suppose that if you're looking at budgeting, again, I'm not exactly sure how that works. You can retroactively go and take out of that pot. But I think what's important is that, again, given the timelines we had to do it, we didn't have time to go and hire a consultant or do an RFP or anything like that. And that would have been the straightforward, clean approach as far as the money goes, right? Spend that money on hiring somebody to help us with this. That is the approach we're taking with other elements of Bill 44, the OCP, for example, and the housing needs assessment. But again, I can't give you an accurate assessment of the exact time that I've contributed to this. I can look back and come back to council with a more accurate number.
Yeah, I just think it would be useful for us if we go to UBCM in the fall and we say our planning department spent blank amount of hours on this and we got 2 houses out of it or something, I mean, that's the only thing.
Yeah. I do appreciate your approach though, Mr. Similini, that you're treating it generally, I know it's a lot of work, as a good news story in terms of how it's going to help housing in our community. So thank you for that. Councillor Audie Kelly, did you have a question? No. Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. I think this will be my last question on this. No promises. I noted one of the restrictions that's in the provincial regulations that after July 1st, we will no longer be allowed to convert a residential lot into a non-residential lot. That was one of the restrictions that's in there. And it just made me think I should ask that question if we have something like that we should do in advance. I can't think of any residential. I mean, I know we have some lots that we talked about for disposition and things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe if they were going to transition to park or commercial or something of that nature, if it's worth considering that prior to the regulation coming.
Yeah, your worship, through to Councillor McIsaac, I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I'm not quite sure what the context is as far as converting. Like, for example, if we have an existing lot that is zoned residential, but our OCP says its future land use is not to be residential, can we convert that? Or is it just taking that right off the table as well? So I'll have to look into the context of that. The one area that comes to mind right off the top of my head is 3rd Avenue, where the house is back onto the 2nd Avenue businesses. So just like a block this way. So I guess a block to the north from where we are. That said, I think that those ones are currently zoned residential already. And I don't know if, like, do we see an expansion that formerly they were commercial. They were commercial up to a couple of years ago, I believe. And I think we rezoned them to residential, or at the very least they are earmarked as residential in our land use map, I believe. I'll have to double check that, but that's just the one area that comes to mind that might be influenced by that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an excellent, just continuing your worship. I think that's a good example, because if that was one where we were looking at, depending on how the growth of the downtown goes, and we were looking at moving those eventually to residential, commercial, eventually commercial, and don't have that ability to make that zoning change, this would be a good time to find that out. Yeah. But I'll leave that to you, investigate.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Councillor McIsaac. And it's not to say we have a surplus of residential properties, but I think that clause is definitely geared towards the larger centers where you'd see like a a rezoning for major commercial development from homes and that type of thing.
Counselor Nixon?
Just one last question. I think I know the answer already, but does the regional district have to do the same sort of, do they have to do the SHMU thing as well?
I'll have to look into that, Councillor Nixon. I believe that at the very least, like again, communities of 5,000 or more have to do 3 or 4 dwelling units. Communities under 5,000, and I believe regional districts have to provide at least 2 dwelling units per property. So we already had that. We had the R1, which you could have a suite. And we had the R1B, which you could have a detached suite. But for communities that only have single family as the permitted use, they have to amend their zoning bylaws to allow at least for a suite or a detached suite on a property.
Other questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Simulini. That was an excellent introduction. And I am optimistic and I'm not going to panic just yet.
Thanks, Council. So we'll bring back the bylaw for first and second or first, second and third reading in May and have further discussion. We'll have some more details for you at that point and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. That moves us on to item 8, correspondence. 2 more letters from the Minister of Housing that actually prompted Mr. Simulini to come down the hall and suggest I write the minister and tell him to stop writing letters. I don't know if council had any comments on those. Seeing none, that will conclude the business of the committee of the whole. Thank you to our presenters and thanks folks for joining us. We'll adjourn this meeting and then go immediately in, well, we'll take a 5-minute break and go into a special meeting. Mr.
If I may, Your Worship, the special meeting won't take 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, we won't, we'll adjourn this meeting and we will go straight into the, unless anybody desperately needs a bio break.
It's my understanding that one of your counselors is hoping to get out the door by 8:30.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
I just received that note. so.
Okay, fair enough. We will then adjourn the committee of the whole. And we will convene our special meeting. Welcome everybody to the special meeting of council held at 8:23 p.m. on April 16th, 2024. Once again, we acknowledge that the city of Fernie is located within Kukinamakis, the unceded territory of the Yakutat Nucleate, and we recognize that we live and work within their vast lands. Akanahunik are from Yakutat Nucleate and are members of the Tanaha-speaking peoples of British Columbia, Idaho, and Montana. I will call this meeting to order and ask for a mover and a seconder for approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor Ramirez. Any discussion? All in favor? And that brings us to the only item on this agenda. You're right, it's a quick meeting. The only item on this agenda, which is the 5-year financial plan bylaw 2510 for adoption. And I will ask Mr. McConnell to read the recommendation.
Thank you, Your Worship. The recommendation is that the 5-year financial plan 2024-2028 bylaw number 2510 2024 be adopted.
Can I ask for a mover? Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor McIsaac. Any discussion? Councillor McIsaac.
Not so much discussion as soapbox here. And not even so much that. I just had a couple things that I want to say before we vote. One is I want to say how much I appreciated the process this year. Every single year that I've been at this table, the process gets better, and that speaks a lot to our staff and how the quality of material that they bring us is just excellent. It would be very difficult to argue that we do not understand what the financial position of the city is or how we got here after this year. One thing I wanted to say before we move on in the voting is while I support the budget and I support the decisions that have been council at the table so far, I cannot help but remind everyone that we are underfunding our reserves. We are spending them down faster than we are putting money in. People are going to pay for that mistake. We are doing this with full knowledge. Every single person sitting here knows that this is a fact, and we are ignoring it by passing this particular budget. And I realize that we are fighting for moderation, finding a middle ground between what's necessary and what's affordable. And as a consequence, I'm supporting it. But, you know, if we are going to tout transparency and openness at this table, honesty with our community about what the financial reality is paramount. And the financial reality is we are kicking the infrastructure costs down the road to the next people who will then pay more, and the next people after that who will then pay more, because we're not willing right now. We're not willing today. We weren't willing last year. We weren't willing the year before that, and so on, to tell people what it actually really costs to have the infrastructure in this community for the services and amenities that they ask for. Our community survey was very clear. People want the services and amenities provided. They want to pay for them. Twice as many people in the survey asked us to raise taxes as asked us to lower it. People are aware of what the issue is. They are supportive of us doing a good financial job. So I really appreciate the work that's been done by staff. I think we're in a good place. I would like to see us in a better one. And we're going to hopefully make those choices over the upcoming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McIsaac. Any other comments? Seeing no further discussion, I will call the vote. All those in favor? Myself, Councilor McIsaac, Councilor Hamilton, and Councilor Nixon. And those opposed? Councilor Ramirez, Councilor Shoesmith, and Councilor Audia Kelly. And with that, I will adjourn the special meeting at 8:27.